Hello, Quinns Quest patrons. Quinns here, joining you with a tall glass of my current favorite beverage, which is just half a lemon squeezed with some cold soda water. Bourgeoisie? Oh yes. Delicious? Oh yes. So this video was advertised as the RPGs that made me, which I think now that I sit down to film it and write the script and whatnot, I think is much too clean of a description. It feels like something invented by my publicist. So the truth is that this video, if anything, goes out to those of you watching this who are struggling to put an RPG group together or keep an RPG group together, or people who just read one of these big books and get really excited and then you finish reading it and then this big question mark appears above your head as you're like, wait, how do I actually play this game? Because what this big stack of my old books is, right? Like, on the one hand, they do spark joy. That's why I've kept them around. I like having them in my house. I like looking at them. But the memories I have of these games are quite complicated and nuanced. You see, they don't just spark joy. They're also like radioactive objects that shoot out not radioactive atoms, but just particles of failure. The failures that I had when I tried to get into RPGs again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Memories of disappointment as I couldn't keep my campaigns together, or the shame of realizing I'd structured my stories poorly, or retroactive realizations that the world I built was low-key racist, or maybe most prominently of all, there's a nobility and a grandeur to how RPGs are written and presented. These books contain whole worlds, electric perspectives, wild adventure. And I could feel that from when I first opened a Dungeons & Dragons book when I was maybe 13. And then when you invite your friends over to come and play one of these games and the whole experience just kind of fizzles. It's like getting your friends in your car and saying, oh, we're going to go off into the wilderness and do ayahuasca. And then it rains the whole time and the drugs don't work. Oh my god, there's so much dust on these books. So yes, in this video, I will be walking you through the biggest campaigns from when I was aged 13 to about 30. And I should flag here that usually in my professional work, I think long and hard about what game to put on camera and why, which game or designer deserves it. And in this video, that's obviously not going to be the case. Quinns, why did you play Hunter the Reckoning as opposed to Vampire the Masquerade? Because I was 15 and this book had flames on the cover, motherfucker. So yeah, please, I ask for your patience. Dude, this is it's slightly esoteric if you like genre games. But also in this video, I'm going to be doing something that, candidly, I do not do enough of on Quinns Quest, which is simply talking about how hard this hobby is to involve yourself in. So as I go through each of these campaigns, I'm also going to be talking about why those campaigns were disappointing, why they fell apart. And like in all of these games, I don't think I ran a campaign of maybe more than like 15 sessions, maybe often 10, often less than 10. So first things first, the game that got me into role-playing was, naturally, Dungeons & Dragons. I'm talking about the second edition. I don't have those books in my home anymore, so I can't show them on camera, but this is what the book looked like. Picture me, by the way, at age 14 and then going into 15, role-playing Dungeons & Dragons for one player at a time. It's me, the GM, my screen, the books, all the materials, and then one person sat opposite me and I'm GMing a whole adventure just for them. I did this for one friend and then later I did it with another friend and later I did it with another friend. So why didn't I just bring all those friends together and have a real party? Because for my anxious ass at age 14 or 15, the idea of inviting my friends who didn't know one another to this shared, weird, geeky experience felt like unbelievably high stakes. What if they didn't get on? What if the game was weird? That would make me weird. And that shit was like playing Russian roulette, except worse. Because at least if Russian roulette doesn't work out for you, you're dead at the end. It's hard for me to know what to tell you about my D&D campaigns because I think D&D is so popular now that it's kind of like the oxygen that we all breathe. So it's hard to know what observations I could give you that are exciting or interesting. Like, did you know it feels amazing to roll a 20 on a 20-sided dice? Did you know leveling up feels really good? What I think I could tell you about my campaigns of D&D is that nobody told me how to do it, right? I was an only child. I didn't have an older brother who was into it, and I didn't have any actual play shows on the internet that I could listen to. So I just read the book and then assumed how it should be played. And how I defaulted to, it's kind of interesting thinking back, was very, very intense. Like, I always played in low light. There were always 2 candles on either side of my big GM screen. I always had a soundtrack playing on my hi-fi system. We had to play downstairs because the only hi-fi system was downstairs. And then, like, as soon as I bought it, I always defaulted my campaigns to Ravenloft. Ravenloft, is it singular? Which Wizards of the Coast still sell. It's their gothic horror setting for D&D. And I was like, perfect, you know? I think, like, naturally as a child, I had defaulted to something that a lot of the old school Renaissance community now feel, which is that the default setting of D&D should be horror. You're going into a dark place full of monsters that want to kill you. That's horror, right? And so Ravensloft always made sense to me as a kid because this should be spooky. It should be intense. You're going to die. I also distinctly remember loving the Ravensloft module, the Shadow Rift. I ran 2 different friends through the entirety of this module. I say I ran them through it. Like, God knows how much fudging I had to do because, you know, this is a module designed for like several high-level players, and I was running 1 first-level character through it. So I think I must have just left all the traps on the floor, no monsters in any of the encounters, and I definitely remember fudging a lot of dice, always rolling behind my screen and always being like, oh, they miss. So yeah, I'm sure my D&D games were like laughably intense. I wanted my players to feel something, which funnily enough is still exactly how I GM now. I don't have the same intensity, but a good session is when my players find something funny or I mean, I have a broader palette now. My players can find something funny or scary or captivating or enchanting or, you know, even hate. Like, these are all valid things. I just want my players to feel stuff. And like, you know, GMing for 1 player does seem like somehow inherently ridiculous to me now, but at the time, I remember it feeling kind of luxurious for that player because you can really stare them down and give them hard decisions and make them the star of the show, and they don't have players to their left and right that I can discuss things with. If a game happens to get intense for a player, which is always what I was trying to do as a GM, that intensity is redoubled because they don't have anyone else to joke with. They're just, this weird 14-year-old Quinns is staring them down. And so it's, I don't know, it's like a cross between role-playing and like aggressive hypnosis. But I don't want to also make my games sound like they were amazing because they can't have been. I was GMing for the first time. We certainly weren't playing with all the rules. I certainly didn't understand all of the rules. And yet, one of my friends, the people who I played with, I was speaking to them on the phone like 20 years later. And he was like, hey, do you remember that Dungeons and Dragons we used to play? Those games were so fun. Those games stayed with that player long into their adult life as something amazing. And this is where I get the chutzpah to make the point that I made in the Getting Into RPGs video that I made for Shut Up and Sit Down, where I say that you should try GMing because role-playing is great fun to do badly. And so my point is, I was GMing badly. My friends were straining to hear me over the Fellowship of the Ring soundtrack CD that I played over and over again. And whenever there was a track that was too like twee, because it's the soundtrack in the Shire, I would stand up and run over and hit skip track and then run back down and sit down. It's absurd, but also it was great. However, the thing about role-playing in the year 2000, which is about when my D&D games were taking place, is that because online shopping was not a thing, which makes me sound so fucking old, you had to go to hobby stores to buy the books, right? And when you went to hobby stores, if you wanted to play D&D, you had to work a little bit to find it among all the other games that were for sale. And that's like what I'm partly doing with Quinns Quest is trying to get the role-playing hobby back to that point, where if you go to a store to buy role-playing books, D&D is not just the only option, nor is it the default. And that is how I got put onto all kinds of other games. So following my D&D, I immediately began experimenting with, I played a little campaign of Hunter the Reckoning. I also played a little campaign of Alternity Star Drive, ran a little game of, several games in fact, of Shadowrun, one of which was entirely taking place over the phone with 1 player. And I played enough Shadowrun that I feel like I should talk about it here, but also I'm not going to because, as anyone who's read this edition of Shadowrun will tell you, the rules are so impenetrable. I simply played with none of them, so it doesn't feel sort of fair to talk about it from a game design perspective. But I'll tell you what I did play correctly following that was Deadlands. Ow, motherfucker, ow, ah, fuck. Ugh, we just tripped on the light stand. So Deadlands First Edition is the only RPG that I played as a young person that I am truly just a fan of for life. It's not just the RPG that I played when I was young, it's the RPG I fell in love with. Progressive in a way that only a game published in 1996 can be, Deadlands offers an alternate history of America where, during the colonization of the United States in the 19th century, an indigenous American shaman, their words not mine, casts a ritual to kick the white man out once and for all and basically opens the gates of hell, but also who cares because what was happening to them was hell anyway. What results is something the setting calls the Weird West, where dead people don't stay dead, monsters start crawling out of holes, and a new, totally not haunted mineral is found in the earth called ghost rock. And sure, it sounds like you're releasing long dead souls into the atmosphere when you burn it, but it also ushers in a new era of mad science. Also, because it's the 90s, one of the playable classes is just a cool priest who our Lord Jesus Christ actually answers the prayers of. You can find Deadlands in the same ballpark as Cyberpunk or Shadowrun, you know, books where if the world building was less cohesive or the writing was less good, you'd read these books and be like, damn, they just threw a lot of shit at the wall, huh? But instead, the world building is just complete. It is transporting. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the book, but that just makes you feel like you're browsing the encyclopedia of an imaginary place, an atlas of a world you want to visit. Plus, as a GM, I can just narrate 19th century firefights all day. I'm talking hiding behind wood as bullets ping off it and splinters shoot into your eye. I'm talking sweatily fingering bullets into your breech-loading rifle. I'm talking quick draw duels. I'm talking Butch Cassidy. I'm talking Clint Eastwood. I'm talking Django Unchained. And like, the other cool thing is that if you run a Wild West game, you have access to just a treasure trove, an Aladdin's cave of era-appropriate soundtrack music. Another cool thing about Deadlands is it doesn't just use nerd dice, it also uses poker chips and the 52 card deck. So the poker chips are pretty straightforward. They're the experience points that the GM gives to the players, but also the players will give them back to the GM if they instead want to spend them to get a benefit to a dice. So you can either be kind of lucky in the fiction or you can learn from your mistakes. And this is cool because the GM saying, okay, great, everyone gets 5 experience points is cool, but the GM sliding 20 chips into the middle of the table after you've defeated some big foe is cooler, right? I mean, like, it makes you feel a little more on theme, makes you feel like you're sat around a table as cowboys or whatever it is you're playing. Maybe you're playing a nun, maybe you're playing a Native American. Also, though, there's the 54 card deck. So the way that this works is these are your actions in combat. You do an initiative check, kinda, and that determines how many actions you get. So 3 for the fast guy, 2 for the slower guy, maybe 1 for the even slower guy, and then the GM counts down. You go, does anyone have an ace? Does anyone have a king? Does anyone have a queen? And a player might go, I do, and then flip 2 queens, and then they get 2 actions. It's surprising, it's fun, everyone loves holding a hand of cards, it fills the combat with secrets, and also, because you have 2 decks, one for the enemies and one for the good guys, it is entirely possible you will flip exactly the same card and shoot each other at exactly the same time. That's neat. Also, this is just a personal thing, but it seems like today every designer wants to incorporate the tarot deck into their game, and tarot's cool. I like it, but what happens when you incorporate tarot into your game is you flip a card, everyone goes, ooh, and then you get a reference book and you look up what it means. And I thought we all agreed that looking at reference books in the middle of our role-playing games was something to be avoided, actually. Tarot's nice, but it is slow. The 54 card deck, on the other hand, is quick and it is cool. I would love to see more games using it in a way that is not just like a unique thing where we can put the cards onto the table and build dungeons with them, but I like to use the 54 card deck as it's used most commonly. I like holding cards, I like playing cards, I like drawing cards. Anyway, so I ran campaigns of Deadlands when I was maybe 22 and maybe 24. And yet, despite the fact that I love this game, and despite the fact that I had all the resources and emotional intelligence of a 24-year-old man, which in 2008 was, to be fair, basically nothing, both of my campaigns fizzled after between like 10 and 5 sessions. And so, like, let me be honest here. I've thought a lot about why those 2 campaigns failed. And honestly, I struggle to think about why that is. I talk a lot on Quinns Quest about how if you're thinking about role-playing, you should absolutely do it. It's easier than you think. Just get stuck in. The only way to learn is by doing. And that is not untrue, but it is also to give the would-be GMs watching this a push, which is the all-important thing. But the truth is that while it's easy to start GMing, keeping a campaign and a group together requires time and energy, and it also requires either charisma or stubbornness. But I don't think that's why my campaign failed. If I really rack my brain, I think the reason my Deadlands campaigns failed both times was because I'm a perfectionist. So like when I read these books, you might feel the same way, but it is just so exciting. The campaigns you imagine in your head, the stories you imagine telling are like irrepressibly awesome. And then when you actually sit down though, as a slightly novice GM with novice players, it's never going to go that way. It's going to feel silly and awkward and goofy, and encounters and NPCs are just not going to go how you think they're going to go. The whole thing is like a parade of small disappointments. And I think the reason that both of my Deadlands campaigns ended, even though my players were having a blast, and that's what I should have been paying attention to, is that I couldn't take what I imagined the campaign being compared to the reality of what it was. And I think I just ran out of gas. I was still in some way that kid who was lighting candles and putting the soundtrack on and needing everything to be so intense and perfect. And when it wasn't that, I stopped calling up my friends and saying, hey, come over and we'll play Deadlands again. And then this happened exactly the same again, I think, the next year with my campaign of Traveller. Or more specifically, the spin-off source book, Traveller 2300 AD. If Traveller is Star Trek, then Traveller 2300 AD is a little more like hard sci-fi. It's an earnest attempt to imagine what humanity's first stumbling steps into a populated galaxy would really look like. Slightly higher chance of you suffocating in this one, basically. So like a lot of people I've found out, and a lot of designers in the RPG community, Traveller is just sort of constantly, invisibly with me. Kind of like how if you look into just the right light and squint your eyes, you can see all the little creatures swimming around on your pupil. As nerds, we all like shows like Battlestar Galactica and The Expanse, which are about spaceships, but we've made them fractionally more well thought through and therefore more boring, but also more exciting. And when I was about 24, I wanted some of that, but I got excited by the idea of hard sci-fi, so I tried my hand at 2300 AD. And like, Traveller to me is kind of just annoying because it does what it does just well enough that the brand can survive and they can keep putting out source books for it, and no other publisher seems to want to try and go head to head with them by creating a different game and compete with them for that niche audience. But also, Traveller's rules are quite dated and its vision of the future is just so dry and lacking in culture. There's no food in its vision of the future, no art, no entertainment, no fashion, no gender play, no sexuality, no sports. So every time I think about playing it, I just look at it and feel like I'm holding a body that's been chemically dehydrated. And basically, I think what happened with my campaign of Traveller was exactly what happened with my campaigns of Deadlands. I ran it for about 6 sessions with a really strong vision of a story. I actually, you know what? I'll be self-indulgent for a second because where's the place to do that if not on the Patreon, and talk about the completely white-hot prologue I did for this campaign. I still think this is a great fucking idea. So what I did, I told my players to make their characters, and then when they showed up for session 1, they had different character sheets in front of them. They were playing members of the United Earth Navy, like people who were part of this incredibly cool Black Ops ship, and they were returning to Earth for shore leave, and I had them all roleplay just getting drunk. These were super high-level naval officers with the intention of just getting blind wasted, and so they all just roleplayed these characters. They had fun with it. And then all of their beepers went off because someone had stolen an incredibly important other ship, and so drunk, they were told to report back to their high-level Black Ops ship to go and hunt the thieves who'd stolen this ship. And no surprise, the thieves who'd stolen that ship were the player characters. And then we jump into the player characters, but we've already introduced the villains who are terrifying and humanized who are going to be hunting them. I love that shit. Anyway, what actually happened in that campaign was after about 6 sessions, when we had our first session where what I envisioned didn't quite happen, the story forked hard from what I expected, and we had a kind of unsatisfying session that I wasn't prepared for, I just never told my friends to come back for another campaign of Traveller because my perfect vision for what the campaign should be was now in tatters. And as part of the process of writing the script for this video, it is just abundantly clear what my mistake was, which is with pretty much every campaign from when I was age 24 younger, it was about me. I was making it about me, the GM. I was saying, I have a vision for a story that I'm going to drag you through, when that's not what role-playing's about. Role-playing should be about the players. It should be about their decisions and their choices, and therefore you can tell a story together where you're all surprised at what happens. That's the heart of the hobby. It's freedom. And I was not giving my players freedom because I had a succession of really cool, just the coolest scenes ever that my players were going to hit one after another, like the rooms of a ghost train. And as soon as a role-playing game did what it did, which is surprise me, I suddenly felt undermined and disappointed, and it all became farcical. And I says, okay, yeah, no, I somehow felt that not just I'd failed, but we'd failed as a group, which is ridiculous. But here's the good news. I figured that out in the very next year of my life when I was 25, running a campaign of Legend of the Five Rings. This is the point in which I feel that games mastering and running role-playing games simply clicked for me. And I think there's a cool lesson in that. To all the people watching this who might want to become games masters or want to become better games masters, that I'm not sure I can think of a better skill in terms of achieving that objective than just sticking at this hobby. Look at it. I tried it over and over and over again, and then finally, it all made sense in a game that's slightly problematic. So yeah, at the age of 25, I ran a not super long campaign of Fantasy Flight's then new edition of Legend of the Five Rings, the role-playing game. And while, yes, like just about all of my other campaigns, it sort of petered out after about 8 evenings, the difference is it felt complete, and I can look back on it and think, that was just a solid campaign. I feel nothing but pride for my memories of L5R, and also nothing but awkwardness for participating in something so comprehensively culturally appropriative. If you're not aware, Legend of the Five Rings is like East Asia the RPG, as conceived by a team of primarily white people in the 90s. And like, you can see how they arrive at this idea quite nobly. D&D draws as its source material European history and Western fantasy novels, so they set out to create a game that celebrates Japanese and Chinese and Korean history and mythology all swirled up in a big mess. And then we get to play something a bit more culturally diverse, and also we all get to roleplay cool samurai movies. And to be clear, just like with Deadlands, I have seen the source material they're drawing from. I will GM the shit out of this game. 2 samurai standing perfectly still with just autumn leaves falling between them as one of them gets ready to strike, not knowing that they will surely perish. Whole armies of samurai riding towards one another on horseback, clashing, banners falling. Blue-eyed samurai, Samurai Champloo, Ghost of Tsushima, Sekiro. I've seen it all. I love it. I will put it in your veins. I'm slightly ashamed to say that even writing the script for this very video this morning, I found myself looking at L5R splat books and being like, I could run this game again. But I don't run this because there is a fundamental unhealthiness to this book. It's like living in a house that has mold behind the wallpaper. Like the different clans of this book, the mechanics, the war against the darkness they find themselves in, the politics, that's all great, but also it is impossible to play this game without arriving at some stuff which feels very squicky, very Orientalist. Like your players are going to spend so much time worrying about their honor. You might have whole plot threads about honoring your ancestors. A player might fall in love with a great beauty at the court who is just so demure, so feminine, or like you might be writing poetry about cherry blossoms. And in 2025, if I'm going to do that, I would like to do it in a way that would mean I wouldn't have to kill myself if a person of actual Asian descent saw me doing it. And that means people of color writing this book and sensitivity readers going over the copywriting in it. And some people watching this might think, oh, okay, cool. Maybe one day, maybe the next edition of Legend of the Five Rings, they will do that. And I'm here to tell you that I simply don't think that will ever happen because I am friends with people of color who get brought in as sensitivity consultants on things like big video games. And that job is just hellish for the people involved. And it also tends not to work. The way it works is people of color are brought in to be like, please make our pre-existing brand less racist. And the people of color say, okay, you need to change this, 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 and this. And then the white people who are managing them say, yeah, no, those are 10 poles of the brand. We can't change any of that. And then the person of color who's the sensitivity consultant has 3 choices and they're all bad. They can quit. They can just go, okay, which means they're doing their job badly, or they can take the fight to those managers. They can say, no, really, you have to change this stuff. And the managers say, no, really, we can't. And then that job is just miserable. You're making the very people who hired you hate you. And probably you're still going to have only very small incremental changes to the source material. So honestly, look, if they can make a version of L5R that's not problematic, cool. I think the odds of that happening are just minuscule. And personally, if I want to do something that's like wushu themes, then I'm going to be looking at different new modern designs to do it in. Anyway, if I do say so myself, my campaign of L5R was banging. It was the first campaign that I ran in my life, which wasn't about like, what story can I hook my players to and then drag them through the scenes I've got pre-prepared like they're a fish on a line. And instead I thought, what's a good sandbox for my players? What's going to let them make interesting decisions? So I made them all the like political refugees of a clan which had its leadership assassinated, and now the clan was being reinstated, this very small hare clan in a valley in the middle of nowhere. And they were brought back in to be like, okay, the hare clan is allowed to exist again. You can now rule over the serfs that live here. And so they inherited this whole territory that they had to run. They had to assert their authority over these peasants. There were monsters up in the hill for them to deal with. The coffers were empty. They had no palace. They had to build one of those. They had to meet their neighbors in neighboring lands, and the neighboring lands predictably all had ideas for how they could use the fact that the hare clan was back to their own ends. And then it ended, the campaign, sort of like the finale, was an actual invasion of one of the big clans into the hare clan territory. And it was this like last stand where this small clan said, okay, we're absolutely going to be steamrolled, but if we can hang on for long enough, then we will at least go down as an honorable clan and we will have our sort of dark history redeemed. It was a great story. It was also the last time I would pick up a role-playing book for about 5 years. I just got distracted. I guess it's when I started Shut Up and Sit Down with Paul. So that was when board games took over my life. The next time I would pick up a role-playing book and run a campaign was when I was 30. This is Torchbearer. I love Torchbearer. Torchbearer is cool. It does one thing super duper well, which is that it takes that fundamental role-playing game thing of going into a dungeon, and then what it latches onto is the sensation of going underground. Torchbearer is spelunking, it is climbing ropes, it is getting tired, it is the darkness creeping around your vision, it is you being cold because you just have to ford a freezing river, and it's doing it all for maybe like a necklace and an old shield. And I've done this actually several times in my role-playing career. I've done it like twice since I started Quinns. I read fantasy books and I get so overwhelmed by the nostalgia. I think, yeah, swords, sorcery, dungeons, giants, treasure. This is wicked. Let's get into it. Let's play a classic nostalgic campaign. And then I play it for a little bit. Like I played 5 great sessions of Torchbearer. And all it really did was make me excited about role-playing again, and then I immediately threw away my campaign to play something more modern, and that modern thing was Blades in the Dark. I don't own the Blades book, I played it on PDF. I played my Blades in the Dark campaign when I was about 31, and it's probably the role-playing game that I love the most, that I've talked about the least on Quinns. I had a great Blades in the Dark campaign where I did crazy stuff like print out a huge map of Doskvol before that was like a thing I think a lot of players did. And I had a whole wanted poster made of my players with illustrations of their character that I'd commissioned. My players bought me a huge fancy bottle of rum, and they were making like letters and dipping them in coffee and baking them in the oven so they look super old. So yeah, I absolutely adore Blades. There are 2 reasons I don't talk about it much on Quinns, and one of them is that we published a big written review of it on Shut Up and Sit Down that actually went a little bit viral. And I think in a small way contributed to Blades in the Dark becoming a known game. We gave it oxygen and publicity that helped to get it out to more people, and then that led to more reviews and more attention. And now, of course, Blades in the Dark is maybe the success story for an independent role-playing game. It has so much oxygen and publicity, the game is like hooked up to one of those huge oxygen canisters that you get in hospitals. If you'd like to see what I've written about Blades, though, in the description of this video, you will find a link to the Shut Up and Sit Down Blades in the Dark review, which is like maybe my earliest bit of TTRPG writing. Also, I did over on the Quinns Patreon in a blog post, a whole big long write-up about the new Blades in the Dark product that kind of updates Blades in the Dark to like version 1.5, Blades in the Dark deep cuts. And again, you can find a link to that in the description of this video. If you're looking forward to more Blades in the Dark content on Quinns Quest, I am delighted to say that Blades in the Dark 68, the game that the sort of like total conversion that is official from Evil Hat that advances the game 100 years into the future, into the like swinging 60s, is something that is very much on my radar. I have been looking for an excuse to play Blades in the Dark again with my friends, and Blades 68 is totally that excuse. Very, very, very excited for it to come out. And so next in my role-playing game career, after Blades in the Dark, there was another hiatus from role-playing because I moved cities out of London and so left my role-playing group behind and didn't play role-playing games for a long time until a little thing called COVID and the pandemic. And when I was considering my life and what made me happy after the pandemic, you know, considering what changes I wanted to make in my life, like I think a lot of us did, one of my big takeaways was like, I am never happier than when I am running a role-playing game. So I just want to be role-playing again. And so after COVID, I picked up role-playing games again. And that is when I played Spire and Alice is Missing, which you may know as two big video reviews on Shut Up and Sit Down, followed by my How to Get Into Role-Playing video on Shut Up and Sit Down. And then after that, I launched Quinns Quest. And so that's when I get into the campaigns of like Heart and Wildsea and Lancer and the early Quinns Quest reviews. And that takes us up to the present day. So that is at once a comprehensive tour of the role-playing games that made me, but equally it is the furthest thing from a comprehensive tour of all the great role-playing games of the 80s and 90s and noughties. So if you are watching this, in fact, I don't care how old you are or how long you've been playing role-playing games, what I would love in the comments of this video on Patreon, but also on YouTube, is for you folks to leave a comment explaining the role-playing games or the campaigns that stick in your memory. What were some of the best sessions you had? What were... Oh no, I've realized I'm telling role players to talk about their favorite sessions, which is going to mean that this whole comment section is going to be like a bunch of 500-word comments. Please don't. Please keep it in as short, as few words as possible, because that's going to be much more easy for everyone else to read. But yeah, what are the games that stick in your memory? Either because maybe you had a campaign that should have worked and it didn't, maybe because it's a crushing memory, maybe because you're still thinking about that one mechanic or that one world or that one NPC or that one story. I want to see it all. I want us all to celebrate the journey we have been on that take us to here in 2025, still loving role-playing games, still looking at new releases, still planning new campaigns. Speaking of planning new campaigns, next week I am starting a brand new campaign that I'm not going to reveal. I'm not going to reveal it because you folks who watch the Quinns Quest Patreon are far too good at picking up on my clues and figuring out what reviews are coming next. So I'm going to keep my lips sealed, but I got to buy some new dice, so I'm excited to use them. I'm already telling you too much. I'm telling you too much. I'm out of here. Take care, everybody. Thank you.